wineskin as a container. If you're Pentecostally inclined, it's an invitation for new wine to show up for the next round of festivities and God's presence and refreshing. But if you're Seven Mountain inclined, what you see is that we need to have a vast reorganizing of ourselves so that we can catch the message of what the Lord is saying. You know, when Jesus said new wine goes to new wineskins, he was talking about new doctrine, not new anointing. Pentecostals all think about wine as an experience. But he was saying, I'm going to build new containers for a new movement with a new doctrine. Now, you and I are looking at this kind of like, I still think, through a glass darkly, because the majority of the church world is still separated into, including us, separated into revival, evangelism, awakening, reaching people, and then we have our business and reaching our people and helping CEOs. Do you understand that there is a death struggle over the ideology of America right now, and that all of the institutions are firing in warfare to support or to resist a total transformation of America, which might mean a fundamental transformation that takes us backwards instead of forwards. And it's happening with breakneck speed while you and I are sitting here. And because the devil knows the Seven Mountain message better than we do, he's already got his apostles and prophets at the top of those mountains with their counterfeit churches. Yeah. Think of progressives as a religious ideology, and it will make more sense to what's happening in America. Because I think when you label stuff as it's political or governmental, and we're not into that, Lance, we're more into reaching people for Jesus, here, let me give you an idea about how I'm looking at this. Just to see if you can relate to this. I'm looking at a book recently by a PhD. And I wish I had actually got the book, but I read the summary and I thought, oh, I have signed 10,000 books. I can't buy every book I see because I just I love listening to you guys. I love learning. But the book, I've got to go find it. So the thesis is this. The writer, his doctoral thesis is on, interesting subject. What was preached in the church during and leading up to the Civil War? Because if America is experiencing a cultural civil war, I'd be curious as to whether or not we've ever been here in history before. If we've been here in history before, what would be the closest corollary to where we are now? I would say about the Civil War, we're in a cultural civil war. We're not as bad as we were where the states were tearing apart, but here's the problem. The end time talks about tares and wheat mingled together. So it's not as simple as the agricultural South with slavery and the industrial North with its economic engine. So you have tares and wheat all mingled together. But here's the point. The South preached sermons that reinforced their right to sovereignty, autonomy, the dignity of the individual, and the tyranny of oppression, and the righteous cause of rising up against the tyranny of oppression from outside forward. In other words, the preachers were preaching that which affirmed the South's resistance. They weren't preaching pro-slavery. They were actually preaching the right of the states to resist the tyranny of the North. Okay, so their themes were about freedom and resisting tyranny. What were they preaching in the North? Well, in the North, they were preaching in the pulpits about the righteousness of the cause, and more about the emancipation of slaves, and about the end of oppression. And Lincoln's beautiful addresses in his inaugurations went right to the root of the matter, where it said our national pain and affliction could very well be the working out of God's cosmic punishment because of slavery. He brought it to a crisp focus as a preacher, and quoting the Bible more than most preachers do, by the way, in his inaugurations. What was preached in the border states? In the South, you had it preached in autonomy, independence, and resistance of tyranny. In the North, the freeing of those oppressed and the righteousness of the cause. The border states, Maryland, like this was Kentucky, this was Delaware, what were they preaching? Fascinating. They were preaching, stay out of politics and focus on the kingdom. Let that sink in. They were preaching, God hasn't called us to get involved in politics. God's called us to focus on Jesus and the kingdom. Now, the reason I did that is because those preachers had the pressure of both the South and the North, and they didn't want to get involved with preaching against slavery or forced states' rights, so they said, let's stay out of politics, let's talk about the kingdom. So I think where we are right now is we're at an interesting moment in history, where Christians and Christian leaders don't want to get involved with the actual battle, but I'm going to tell you something. If you were in Germany during the rise of National Socialism with Adolf Hitler, and you had the prophetic foresight to see where that continuum of Hitler was going to go in 10 years. Right now he may be popular. Right now he may be the chancellor. Right now there might be some economic development. But if you had eyes prophetically to see where the tyranny was going, then you would be justified early on in doing what you could to try to keep that power from coming into office. And in history, you would not feel proud of yourself if 30 years later, 40 years later, or 70 years later, people are looking at the history books and you were known for being politically agnostic at the time that Nazi Germany was getting taken over by Jew-killing people. And then once you got the evidence that they're killing the Jews, once you get the evidence that they're taking them off in the cattle cars to Auschwitz or Treblinka, if at the same time that you're looking at, after the baby survives the abortion, you still kill it, or force the indoctrination of children in elementary school and in junior high school to lesbian and gay and bisexual and transgender identity, and then supporting them in their quest to identify themselves and taking them away from their parents if their parents are not supporting the transitions going on in their life. If you actually could see what's happening now, we're in a place just like where the citizens of Germany were while Hitler was coming to power and telling people what he planned on doing. You don't want to be neutral right now. To me, you're a border state Christian, and history will judge you harshly because it'll point out that what you really were accommodating was either ignorance of the times or apathy or worse, cowardice. Yep. Now, this kind of teaching doesn't make you popular and get you in a lot of churches, I can tell you that right now. So for that reason, I had friends of mine that said to me, "Oh, Lynch, you keep going down this road. As a matter of fact, you might as well prepare yourself right now." This before the election. They said, "You better prepare yourself right now because Hillary's going to audit you." I said, "What? I'm just a small potato." "Oh, now you're on that list right now." And these are Washington people. They all nodded. Like they didn't even bring up a voice of resistance. So they all said, "Yeah, we're all going to get audited." I thought, really? Because the institutions become weaponized. Do you realize that the NSA and the DOJ and the CIA and the FBI were weaponized intelligence services to take out political opposition? I know that there's like a fog on this subject that it's like witchcraft. The church itself has to be able to get it off its head. We have entered into a period where the very institutions that are there for the sake of preserving democracy have become infested with an ideology that actually is out to investigate and destroy its political opposition. And those intelligence agencies were weaponized against Donald Trump. And the guy he's freakily prophetic. I learned a long time because I had to watch. I'm like the Trump whisperer. Whatever's going on with him, I actually understand exactly what he's saying. And so when he talks about, he goes into Belgium, he goes into, what was it, Brussels, used to be such a nice place, now it's wherever. And whenever he's describing Europe, and they go, "Can you imagine how stupid this man is? Imagine him as a president insulting other nations, saying it used to be a great place, now it's just terrorism. There hasn't been an incident of terrorism. This place is complete." There's a kaboom, something happens. Oh, what happened? Well, there was a bomb went off at the train station in Brussels. It's like he's eerily prophetic about this stuff. So when he said, they're spying up at Trump, and go, spying, he's paranoid, he's an ignoramus, everybody's spying on Donald Trump. Well, we find that out, they were spying on him. They were spying on him. The FBI tried to get two people planted into his campaign. They went for job interviews. And thank God that they were rejected. What do you think they would have done if they were in his organization? You think they would have just been kicking over the stones to see if Russians were there? Or how about they might be stimulating actual contact with Russia so that they could go, so that they would have evidence that there was trying to find a Papadopoulos, something like that, who would play along with them, which is what happened to that poor guy. He got set up in Europe. The CIA had set up him so that he was going to meet somebody who was going to say they had letters. And he was going to go, "You got letters?" "Yeah, we got the letters." And so at the moment he responded with an interest in getting letters, then right away, boom, he's on the list for people that are going to have to be investigated because he's a target for potential Russian collusion. This thing is not done yet, my friends. Why am I bringing that up to you? Because you say, "Well, I'd rather talk about the kingdom." But this is the point. The kingdom isn't just the church, evangelism, revival, and values and culture. Right now, if we do not go into these mountains, you understand these mountains have been taken over. And then whoever controls those mountains, do you know why those mountains are so important? It's not because of the mountains, it's because of who's at the top. Who's at the top? The gatekeeper. And what's the gatekeeper? They have the authority to open up the kingdom of heaven or the gates of hell. And the church is supposed to be where? I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. We should be finding our people in proximity to every one of these institutional high places. I'm very happy to hear what I'm hearing here today. I'm happy to hear that businesses are organizing and coming together. But I'm telling you this, we have to match. Think about this like a football game. You that have businesses and you that have assets and resources, you've got to look at this kind of soberly. Because you're moving the ball this way, but I'm going to show you in a second, the left and its wealth has already been mobilized against you. And they're moving the field back. And we are now down to the point where we're talking about a reprieve. And I believe that word is true. I was just looking at the content for this morning for the breakfast. Unfortunately, I didn't catch on to the fact there was a breakfast till later. But the idea, till lunch, but that doesn't happen. But the idea that there would be, let's see, what was the word? It was a reprieve, and I was writing down my notes here. Oh yeah, here it is. A reprieve, which is a short period of time to cancel or postpone punishment. Well, here we are. We got 2 years right now to mobilize, and we got to resist all the border state people who actually don't understand that we're in a fight ideologically for the survival of America. All of your great businesses you want to see flourish. Listen, you let the wrong people get into this. We are already at a $22 trillion deficit. Trump can't even deal with it. He can't deal because there's no muscle or will in the Republican Party to deal with it. Nobody wants to deal with it. Nobody wants to have orchestrated kabuki theater riots in the street because somebody is getting, their child is starving to death because they're not getting the lunch they were supposed to get. The left is so good at manipulating stuff that the right is afraid of what they could do. So, we almost have to think about this regularly. Is this making sense to you guys? Yeah. I do comedy in the evening and drama in the morning. I soften you up and I get you everybody all vulnerable. Then in the morning I can stick it in and get it all done. So, once again, the concept here is that we're up against something that's highly organized. My friend Kelly Monroe Colbert. Kelly, are you here somewhere? Are you here? What do you want to put your hand up so we can see where you are? I'm not afraid to quote her, but I think she's coming out of the closet. She was one of my secret sources. My nickname for her is she's my Harvard sister. She's always we're at a table and I'm talking to her husband, for instance. She'll go, "Now, pay attention." I go, "Oh, okay, we have to stop talking and pay attention because something's happening." But she did the research, and she has her minions going out and getting all the data and the behind-the-scenes stuff. And I would find out from her information, but I couldn't really want to quote the source because I didn't want to out her too much. She's one of those people that if you interview her, she's digitized and her voice goes in, But not me. I'm not digitized. But she said something last night. She said the highly organized minority is overwhelming the highly disorganized majority. Understand something. We have the muscle. We have the ability. If we ever mobilized ourselves, something would happen. But we have the same problem. I'm going to tell you something. Even though we're all in the same conference, it's still going to come down to this. Everybody's going to break from the huddle and go after pursuing what they did before they got here. And that's the pathetic part. So, and we could change that. I suppose we could change it just by embarrassing ourselves and not into making a commitment. But if you think about what Haggai says, you know what the Lord's argument is? And listen to this. The Lord's argument says, "The second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month of the first day of," this is the first verse of Haggai, "came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel." Remember, this is an interesting period of time where the prophetic anointing is coming upon government and business leaders in order to work with the remnant of the people in the United States who can expand this momentary reprieve that leads into perhaps 5 or 6 years of space to get the kingdom work done. I'm all for kingdom work. It's just I'm saying you've got to choose which is the priority now. And if there's a fire in the kitchen, you have to momentarily leave the prayer meeting in the living room to put it out. So in the second year of Darius, which was 18 years after Cyrus made the decree, Go back and rebuild Jerusalem. Well, the Jews were a little slow. I'm telling you, God, you know what God has done? It's amazing thing. I'm telling you, this is my perspective on this, but I tell you, I'm absolutely correct. When Donald Trump won, it's like the Jericho walls fell down flat, and all the Christians that are walking around in circles praying and wringing their hands and worried about America, also the walls are down. We didn't know what to do. We're still staring at down wall. We're staring, walls are down. Going, what do we do? I just wish he wouldn't tweet the way he does. What kind of stupidity is this? I'm being honest with you. A man comes into a burning building, and he comes in, and he rescues you out of this thing, and he's clubbing his way here, and he's clubbing his way there, and he breaks you out, and then you complain, I don't know if I like wearing Argyle socks. Why is he wearing that? What do you care about the guy's style and personality? God raised him up as a deliverer. Why did he raise up him instead of the 70 evangelicals who are like, Mike Pence will never embarrass you with a tweet. Rubio, never embarrass you with a tweet. Ted Cruz, he might write a tweet, but it'd be so intellectual, we don't know what he's talking about. Ben Carson, he would tweet, but it wouldn't be that stimulating. Here's the point. We had God, we had all these, I was looking at this thing, evangelical, there's a Christian, Catholic, knows the Lord, and over here, and there's one Bohemian, there's one heathen right there. The guy from Queens, definitely not a Christian, walking around with a Bible. It's hilarious. And the Lord says to me, he says, that's the one. Yeah. I go, oh, no, what are you talking about? I say, that's the one. I'll tell you what the Lord did with Donald Trump. I don't think we figured it because we're still a little bit offended at him. Oh, there is not, I wish he could do this, I wish he could do that. I hope there was a bit. You don't realize that. The Lord picked him because he's offended with us. So smug and self-righteous, it's pathetic. The Lord picked him because he said, well, if you guys aren't going to do anything, if you don't mind, let me try it my way. And then he sends and then instead of sending elegant Isaiah with his flowing robes in King James language, thus saith the Lord, the shepherd from body in their fields, he sends Samson. He sends a rough guy from Queens, just like Samson, with a torrid history involving Philistine babes. And he goes, knocking at the Philistines, walking off with their gates. He's hands us the gates. So you make it, he's talking Hebrew like Jewish right now in curse. This is so frustrating. Because he says to us, hey, the United States is funding universities that aren't even allowing your worldview to be put in the faculty, and you're not even allowed to go on the campuses and speak. Why is the government helping to subsidize these universities when they're preaching an ideology that's anti-American and they won't allow you to do it? Trump says this. Where was the movement of response? Where was the echo chamber reaction? Where was the drumbeats of industry, of business? Where was there even one grassroots organization that could put 200 people up on the hill and say, amen, Mr. President? Silence. Because that's us. We're basically not activist oriented. We pray, we write checks, we make Facebook posts, but we're not breaking furniture. You want to see like real theater, real violence, real smoke, real fire, real passion, the left has it. They could rent the mob book that fast. You should read the book of Acts. You should see where everywhere the Apostle Paul went, it was certain lewd fellows of the baser sort. I love the King James because it flows with such great English. Basically, the left, or in those days, it was the Jews that were militating against Christianity. They organized, and some of the leading influential people would organize and hire the ruffians who would go in there. It was kind of like union behavior in the old days. It's like I used to work with unions. I was in business. I negotiated with the Teamsters union. Trust me, it's like union tactics. And you get a group of people out there that are physically imposing and menacing, and they come around and they intimidate the average citizen who's looking for someone to deliver them. Donald Trump said the most fascinating thing. He said, I've been meeting with Christians all over America. This is during the campaign. I've been meeting with Christians all over America, and I'll tell you something. I see one thing everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, I see one thing. And I couldn't wait to hear what the one thing was. I said, I wonder what that is. Is it devotion? Is it love? Is it patriotism? Is it faith? Is it Jesus? He said, I see fear. I mean, pastors all the time, you're afraid of the IRS, you're afraid of the government. Of course, I'm sorry, but my friends, most of us are driven by fear, and that's the reason why we don't do what we're supposed to do, because we're afraid. But you don't have to be afraid.
Their defenses have departed from them. The walls are down flat, and we're still walking around the city wondering about how they're going. I'll tell you who knows how to disciple nations. The left knows how to disciple nations. You defeat them in Hobby Lobby, they're back next week with another thing. You just heard it. Masterpiece Theater, we beat them in the Supreme Court. Oh boy, we finally got that up. They're back again a week later. They got another one. Forget the gays. It's a transgender issue now. Yeah. Because they're ideologically ditched. It's not, there is no borderland anymore. Every single city is now a contest for the ideological supremacy. And if we believe this thing we're talking about with pinnacles and high places, it has to do with this year. Let me read this real quick. How many know Jordan Peterson? You should know Jordan Peterson. Just watch Jordan Peterson. If you're ever confused about how to deal with, if you're ever worried about what's happening, actually watch the Dennis Prager. Watch the 6-minute Dennis Prager video. And it's Jordan Peterson, and even as a cartoon video. It's good for anybody. It's a cartoon video. But it's just, if you have watched it, I'm going to read you a little bit of the transcript, because this, Peterson anyway, it became famous because he stared down the transgender language of every student in school gets to define themselves the way they want to. And he basically is a student of Marxism. He said, this isn't about transgender ideology. This isn't about loving individuals. This is about political activism that's getting into the college administration. And the guise of inclusivity and openness, they are actually forcing us now to change what comes out of our mouth. That's the beginning of Marxist tyranny, and it's coming through the academic community. He said, no, I will not bow to thee. I will not do it. So he becomes like a Martin Luther. He refuses as a matter of conscience to say something he doesn't believe as a scholar is true because he's afraid of losing his position. In Canada, they're nuts up there. You'd be subject to a tribunal of citizens. A citizens tribunal that would judge him for hate speech because he wouldn't use the preferred gender pronoun of a student. And by the way, it's not just him, her, or Shem, or something like that. There's 17 variations of words that the kid can create. And here's these Jordan Peterson says, university is supposed to be teaching people how to think critically. It's the last place you want to have manipulated and controlled speech. And he said, now, by the way, he's a clinical psychologist. So I can tell you the research on this, and the gender study research is so bad it wouldn't even pass a passing grade as a thesis. He's a Harvard professor too. And so he speaks up as an academician, and he becomes a hero overnight. You know why? People are looking for people that have the courage to speak the truth. Yes. Not everyone knows how to articulate it. So if you can articulate it, you become a hero. If you're articulate and you're courageous, you'll have a following. You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people. So just this one vertical behind the border of education. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology. They've made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. I'm talking about the professors in universities and the vast funding. We did an interesting study. We were looking for the biggest workforce and the biggest companies in the United States. Mercedes was looking at it. And we found out that the universities are the biggest workforce with the most amount of money in the United States. We're looking for like business, Walmart, Apple, AT&T, nothing. It was the universities are the biggest employer with the greatest net gross volume of dollars flowing through them of any institute in the United States. And they are weaponized to destroy you. If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting a gang of nihilists whose mission is to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. Now you're supporting ideologies who claim that all truth is totally subjective, that all sexes are socially constructed, that Western imperialism is the sole source of all the third world's problems, that America is the reason why the world suffers. That's what's out on the street right now, being taught. They are the postmodernists. They're pushing a progressive activism, and it's happening right now at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers. The language police who enshrine in the law use of fabricated gender pronouns. The deans whose livelihoods depend on madly and ruthlessly rooting out discrimination where actually very little or none of it even exists. Their thinking took hold in Western universities in the 60s and 70s, where the true believers, the radical left, became the professors of today. And And now we rack up education-related debt, not so that our children learn to think critically, write clearly, or speak properly, but so that they can model their mentors' destructive agenda. And 45% of them are Marxist professors who resent the United States. And basically, they resent the wealth and the status of people outside of their own classes. They don't feel that they're affirmed enough. It's now possible to complete an English degree in the United States and never encounter Shakespeare or one of those dead white males whose works underlie our society of oppression. To understand and oppose the postmodernists, the ideas by which they orient themselves must be clearly identified. Now catch this. Now I didn't know this, but we've all got to have an intellect upgrade on this stuff. Because the enemy is outmaneuvering us, because we don't understand this. First is the new unholy trinity. Remember these words: diversity, equality, and inclusion. Now diversity is defined not by opinion, but by race, by ethnicity, or sexual identity. Equity, for instance, is no longer the laudable goal of creating ladders of equal opportunity for all people, but rather it's the insistence on equality of outcome. And inclusion is the use of identity-based quotas to attain the misconceived state of equality or equity. All the classic rights of the West are to be considered secondary to those new values. Take, for example, freedom of speech. It's the very pillar of your democracy. It's the foundation of your freedom of religion. The postmodernists refuse to believe that people of goodwill can exchange ideas and reach consensus. They aren't for dialogue. Their world is instead a Hobbesian nightmare of identity groups warring for power. They don't see ideas that run contrary to their ideology as simply incorrect or worthy of a good debate and discussion. They see them as integral to the oppressive system that they plan to supplant, and they consider it a moral obligation to stifle and constrain your utterance. So you see, if you're perceived as a Nazi, the moment that you show up and start to talk, they're going to hit you or shout you down because you don't have a right to speak. They're not interested in the communication process. That's the extent to which mind control has been demonically weaponized in the United States. And here's the amazing thing. What did Jesus say? While men slept. The whole parable about tares and wheat is while men slept, an enemy planted his own agents. And where did he plant them? Where the harvest was located. So the harvest of nations is the end time promise. The harvest of nations. Keep thinking about that. It's not just the harvest of souls. The harvest of souls, listen, the harvest of souls can get you diluted. You might think the whole world is getting saved. I conducted a survey from Joyce Meyer, the Billy Graham Association, Joel Osteen, and Joseph Prince. They put all their data together to run out Bunky, and I was very relieved because I found out the entire world has been saved 2.5 times. So salvation is a very abstract objective, but then when you have a UN vote, like I showed you last night. Now, what about the right of Israel to exist? How about them having a capital? 6 million Jews were killed in Europe. How about them having a little capital over here, a little place of real estate, a football field in the middle of an ocean that they can go to retreat? What do we have? 9 nations stand with it. 128 nations condemn the idea. The entire European Union voted last week and said we reject the right of Israel to be able to have an embassy in Jerusalem. What does that tell you? It's saying the spirit of Antichrist is easier now to measure than our impact in revival and evangelism, because I don't trust the evangelism statistics. But I can tell you when the UN votes, it tells you whether they like Jews and Christians, or whether China is right now shutting down churches, and if you're 18 years old of age, you cannot go to church with your parents. How about that? If you're 18 and younger, you don't even go to church. They're dying off the generation by isolating from their own children. Anyway, I'm going to give you some more edification. Second is the rejection of the free market. All you guys that make a living with the business community, I mean, I'm telling you something, it's great if you can establish Christian culture in corporations, but you better be fighting right now with the next 2 years to preserve the free enterprise system before some knucklehead gets a hold of the steering wheel and, it's going to be Allah Akbar with your plane. Second is rejection of the free market. The very idea that free voluntary trading benefits everyone. They won't acknowledge that capitalism has lifted up hundreds of millions of people so that they can, for the first time in history, afford food, shelter, clothing, and transportation, entertainment, and travel. Those classified as the poor in the U.S. and increasingly everywhere else are able now to meet their own basic needs. This is a remarkable moment in history. Meanwhile, in once prosperous Venezuela, until recently the poster child of the campus radicals, the middle class lines up now for toilet paper. Third, And finally, are the politics of identity. Postmodernists don't believe in individuals. You're an exemplar of your race, or representative of your sex or sexual preference. You're also either a victim or an oppressor. There's no wrong can be done by anyone in the former group, no good can be done by the latter. Such ideas of victimization do nothing but justify the use of power and engender intergroup conflict. You think, this is so sad, because you think that, you're going to pray for peace, and you pray for peace where there's division, Lord, bring peace. See, that I used to pray for peace all the time, and then I started getting smart. I realized maybe instead of trying to put out fires, I should find out who's running around with Soros' budget with a Zippo lighter igniting my house. In other words, if you're on our side, if you're a lover, here's our problem. The Christian community dichotomizes itself, not only separates itself from politics, government, and ideology in the battle of the seven mountains. There's only one or two worldviews that's going to prevail. Either the worldview that acknowledges the truth, or the worldview that is dark and controlled by the devil. It's that simple. The Apostle Paul, when he got saved, he had a very simple commission. The Lord didn't confuse him with 50 shades of gray. He said to him, listen, you're up against the power of Satan versus the power of God. It's the power of truth versus the power of error. That's what we're fighting right now. It's either going to be God or the devil is going to prevail on these high places. Does that make sense to you? Now, the nice thing is, if God prevails, it doesn't have to be all Bible-centric, because truth is truth, whether or not it's quoted from the Bible or whether or not it's just quoted from a good argument. But a lie will always bring forth disaster, my friend. Anyway, it's this politics of identity. These concepts originated with Karl Marx, the 19th century German philosopher. And where are they practiced right now? Well, the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, just Venezuela, to name a few, whose whole economies failed and tens of millions were killed. We fought a decade-long Cold War to stop the spread of those murderous notions, but they're back. And they're back in the guise of politics. Now, the corrupt ideas of the postmodern neo-Marxists should be consigned to the dustbin of history. Instead, we're actually underwriting them right now. We're underwriting their continuance in the very institutions where the central ideas of the West should be transmitted to the next generation. They're being poisoned and turned against their own inheritance. Now, what do you think is going to stop that? Well, you're going to have a president who is like a Samson with a club, who says, you guys want to deal with this? I'll deal with it. It's a sad thing when you have a leader who actually is willing to take action and the body of Christ isn't willing to do anything. And we have a window. That's the scary part. All right, I got something I'm going to show you now, which will really stimulate your interest. We will leave the whiteboard. I'll give you a real quick presentation here, what we're up against. I did this presentation for a room of multi-billionaires and multi-millionaires. And so I was asked to do something in a very succinct manner that was describing the battle that we're up against, which is virtually impossible to do. But let me tell you something. We are late to the game. And the devil has already taken, he has a plan for each of these mountains. He has a plan, and everything that's in the news cycle right now, from the border issues to race issues to gender issues, think activists. Think as though you have counterfeit apostles who are funding small evangelism groups to go create incidents to allow media to highlight awareness of ideas in order to use it as a platform to propagandize and evangelize the nation. We're up against a very interesting machinery right now. So what am I pointing at when I do this? Oh, there we go. So, how the left built the most powerful coalition in history. That's there, the Soros Web. I saw this thing on, this is the Soros organization funded. This is like old. This is old, but this is old news. But in 2004, they began taking over America. And so it was Podesta and Ikes and Stein, Rubin, Blumenthal. And their strategy was basically coming out of a meeting they called Thunder Roads. Soros wasn't in the original meeting. It's a long story, but I don't have time to talk about it. But he got in it later when he realized that there was a way to put his money at play and he could actually shape the ideology of nations. So their plan, here's the 30,000-foot view. They surveyed the strengths of evangelicals and conservatives. They did this meeting in 2004 in Boston. They identified the existing organizations that were effective, Focus on the Family, CBN, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, etc. And the existing organizations that were effective against those strengths and recruited them to Thunder Road. So basically, while we're talking here, if we want to talk strategy, they did a Nehemiah analysis of what's the strength in here of the conservative and evangelical movement, and they said, here's the organizations that are the most powerful. What they did was they built siege engines to go against each of these. And then they looked for where they could put cracks in the wall and penetrate where we didn't exist. And so they did, and it did a high level, I would say almost like principalities and power, wisdom that comes from below, supervise the process. So anyway, they identified the existing organizations, and then they created new organizations where none existed. The left's ground game is they have strategists and financiers who realized in order to affect change in America, they were going to need a couple of resources. They needed a think tank. That's what we're talking about here. We may get together again, we may not, and we may not have the right people. But a think tank, they created the Center for American Progress, led by Podesta. They needed a media operation that could be able to put rapid messaging, saturate social media, and begin to mobilize their movement. So they created Media Matters and put David Brock in charge of it. He's got 40 full-time people that listen to guys like me so that they can take every word I say, find one quote that they can torture out of context, and then put it in BuzzFeed, The Daily Beast, or Right Wing Watch so that I get slapped in the face with media from all these separate sources, all funded as activists, scouring over every syllable that a conservative says in order to embarrass them publicly and slander them. That's what I got to wake up to in the morning. Opposition research. They created citizens. I love the titles they have here. It's like Who's Going to Poison You, and it's called the Wholesome Campaign. But anyways, they created Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Basically, this is the kind of fusion GPS operations that try to dig up dirt or make up dirt on the opposition. Get out the vote. They created GoTV for the effort funding sources. They created the Open Society and Democracy Alliance, and that's where you're going to find Soros' funding in Open Society. It's about $18 billion. Billions of dollars for global influence. And then for the social technology, they have MoveOn.org. There you go. You got your beautiful network there that I was talking about earlier. Yep. Open Society, well actually, all right, so that was your old group, because that was Barack Obama's administration. It's been upgraded since then. But what I want you to see here is take a look at all the nations, the embassies, the politics that are shaped by George Soros. So the Open Society is really is finding and funding advocacy all over the world, so that they're putting in they're getting government grants from the United States to go out. And this is why you've got problems in Hungary where Soros was banned in Hungary. Why? Because these guys are playing. This is a global plan to destabilize nation states, to create the kind of collapse economically out of which the rubble produces the elite system of leadership that empowers the remnant that facilitated the collapse to be in power over the multitudes. And with that, you lose your freedoms. So think about what you're describing as your big vision here, folks. You know what we are? We got to think like the colonial, like Washington. If you're really going to go up against the Brits, which weren't so bad in retrospect, but if you're going to deal with King George, if you're going to deal with something that is larger than you and more powerful than you, the way we're doing it now is you've got the Massachusetts militia, the Minutemen going out in Concord, then you got someone in the New York militia going. In other words, we're fighting an enemy right now like militias. This organization and then that organization. You know what they decided in the Continental Congress? They said as much as we hate the whole idea of big government, we actually have to form a continental army. What we need now in the body of Christ is a continental army. We need to have ourselves unified along these sectors here. And I get it, listen, I'll be the first one to tell you, there's lovers, warriors, and statesmen. I tell you, we got a room full of lovers in here, and a couple of warriors, and a lot of statesmen. Let me tell you what a lover is. A lover's always looking for a way of staying free from the political strife and the subject matters that are controversial and winning people through the gracious, overwhelming demonstration of the goodness of God. That's pastoral for the most part. That's missionary. But the warriors are the people that are doing what I'm doing right now. Telling you what the enemy's doing so that you can understand how to lock the doors, keep the pedophile, for instance, out of the nursery. I'm doing the assessment of what you need to know. You're vulnerable. I'm like the doctor saying, hey, listen, we got to take care of this. Looks like I want another CAT scan over here. So we have to have the warriors because they preserve and protect you from what the devil's trying to do. The lovers are trying to win everybody without being controversial. Then the statesmen. And this is where you got people like you look at this. The Green family had to pick the issue as whether or not they wanted to put all their money into fighting that one issue regarding mandated insurance and abortion or contraception. Here's the deal. The statesman has to pick what battle they get into. Sometimes they're lovers, sometimes they're warriors, but they're always calculating what the cost of the conflict is. And that's what a statesman does. So what you got here, we're back to, oh, sorry about that. You got that, you got that. So what do we have here? This is interesting. This is if, thank you, Kelly Monroe Colbert. Notice, Kelly, I actually give you credit when I'm talking about you. So look at that on the left, and she put together this. This is a map, the Killing America, mapped in the left. This is just some of the organizations that are funded. And you look at these things and you say, oh, what's happening in America? Pray for America. Well, brother and sister, these are organizations who are ideologically committed to an idea that is against what you preach, what you believe. How are we going to hold up against this thing? Then in the middle, you got the media machine from NPR to CNN to NBC. So that map is powerful. The power of humor, which is actually humor minus the R, as a tool of late-night propaganda. You got Bill Maher. Look at this in Time magazine. Notice how the devil is using comedians in late-night television constantly. What was the last time you actually had a conservative? 50 million people are underserved in the marketplace right now because we can't find one comedian that can go. And the left, frankly, is hilarious. If you can't find something funny about Ocasio-Cortez and flatulating cows, you don't have a sense of humor. Plus, Soros is renting evangelicals. Half of you are getting bamboozled by people that are, well, I won't get involved. Donald Trump is. You don't even realize some of them have been bought and paid for. There are evangelicals that are paid for to get into the church market in order to destabilize people who ought to know. Donald Trump is a reprieve. He's a Cyrus. He is like Martin Luther. Martin Luther was not exactly, the most elegant tool in the woodshed, but he happened to have been, in all of his roughness, the appropriate tool to take down what he was fighting. So they give the impression of high moral ground, but they're actually funded by Soros. There's the organization. This is what we're up against. Wow. And we're going to have a meeting in 3 months or 6 months, and people with coaching companies, are going, what are we talking about? See what they have here? They have their advocacy groups. So by the way, if you want to be part of this game, you got to be in the millionaire, billionaire class. You got to be invited into it. This is Democracy Alliance. Democracy Alliance, 300 people. 300 people have to put $250,000 a year, $300,000 a year into one of these organizations or any of them. See, those are all it's kind of like having a blue check mark on Twitter. These are Democracy Alliance approved organizations. Democracy. So here's how the game goes. We want to do this thing the way they do it. Listen, we're always talking strategy. You don't need a flippant strategy. Just copy what works. Here it is. You get leaders who are already at the top of the mountains together. You have to have people of influence. You add to them strategic people like the Podestas, the Carlins. Those are the creative people that have ideas in the sense they're brilliant at the insights they have, and they might not have all the institutional money. But what you do is you put the money together. Each one of them is deploying up $250,000 or $300,000 a year. And what are they going to do with that? They're going to give it to approved Democracy Alliance groups that are working on one orchestrated campaign to disciple America. And so you pick which group you want. Then you could be doing the advocacy groups. What do we got here? We got the OFA, People's Action. Look, they're all different. We've got Planned Parenthood there. They're getting funded. Working America. Doesn't that sound good? Working America. We want Working America. Probably a bunch of Marxist communists. Working families, that sounds good. Working families. Okay, where everybody wants a family to work, they're at work to destroy families, probably. So, litigation advocacy. They got 5 groups. We got Alliance Defending Freedom over here. They're not adequately funded. Kelly Shackelford. Then we got Jay Sekulow over here, and he's working to raise up his donors. But look, those guys say, don't worry about that. You guys are going to go to work on the issues we stir up. Be ready. We're going to fund you. So you got your 200, 300 rich people, $250,000 a year, $30,000 a year dues, by the way, so they can have meetings 4 times a year in posh locations where you will never find one document left because they shred everything before they leave the room. Rapid response. There's something that's interesting. So it's the emergency fund, rapid response. Why? Because they might there might be some kind of a breakdown in their message, and they have to have an immediate deployment of people to go to Ferguson or to go to Baltimore. And so they have to be able to capitalize on what's happening, and that's where they're going to send 5 or 6 of these groups down there. It's a fascinating system. Corporate and government ethics. I love that. So what would that be? Corporate ethics? These are the guys who are going to go around to all of the panels, to all of the CEO boardrooms, and they're going to start advocating for same-sex marriage benefits, etc. These guys have this game. Anyway, so I'm not going to go through item by item, but they have 21 core groups, 170 approved additional groups, and trust me, if you want to play game, if you want to be an advocacy group, you want to get the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. So it's organized, funding, and organized groupings, deploying a national strategy. And then wherever the breakthrough is happening, they reevaluate and reassess, and they move their marbles in that direction. With over $500 million a year since 2005, it's much bigger than that. So what is the answer to the Thunder Road strategy? The left works together. They've got their mainstream media bloggers and media personalities, academia, and all those activists. Our problem is we're disjointed. Conservatives are similar to churches in that sense. We prefer to operate through our independent silos, engage in traditional strategies that worked in the past, going on with business as usual, maybe showing up to vote, maybe not. And then we've been losing to the left for the past decade, and we know why. But will we be the ones to change this? So, what I want you to do is, here's an interesting thing. I ran out of time, but I would love to be able to give you your lover, warrior, king. So David basically, which is why I love the metaphor here. David was a lover of Jesus, a romantic. He writes these beautiful sonnets. He's got instruments, and he's a romantic psalmist and a poet. But he's also a warrior. He's out killing Philistines day and night, killing foreskins piling up for his wedding. And then he has a king. Suddenly he has the kingdom over him, and he expands the kingdom 140% further than Saul ever did, because he did it based upon the tabernacle of David and the leadership of God. So here's the point. Some Christians, unfortunately, they just carve off. They go, well, I'm about love, I'm not about it. And so what happens is you actually jettison 1/3 of who Jesus is, because Jesus actually is the combination of all three. So there is a warrior side to Jesus. I mean, you have to realize that he was scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. How can you escape the damnation of hell, you brood of vipers? By the way, that is stuff that Jesus said, which wasn't very loving, I don't think. And then we have the kings, which are the statesmen, the rulers. These are people that are, whether they're CEOs or they're accountants for their organization, they have to be wise and judicious in what battle they fight, and doing it always with a motivation of love. Everything we do by love. Listen, you even go to war by it. You don't go to war out of animus or frustration. You go to war out of love. It may take you a few moments to sanctify your response, which is why we're a little bit more reflective, but you still have to show up. So I would like to give you guys a survey on that. It's a profile we did, so it's going to be there briefly for you, lancewallon.com/LWK quiz. Because I would like you to know what percentage of you is a lover, what's a warrior, and what statesman or king, just so you could see your own alchemy and see your own preferences, and you can be aware that you have a bias one way or the other. And if you're all warrior and not lover, well, that's a little problem too. We appreciate your war paint and all the rallies, but we're not inviting you to the after party because you get obnoxious. So all of these characteristics are important, and we should have a balance of all three. Does that make sense? All right, well, we did that one on time. We got short videos on Soros. How many are interested in what the left is doing in their cunning utilization of organization? Go to AmericanEvangelicals.com. AmericanEvangelicals.com, and you can see Kelly has some short videos and information on Georgie. Does that make sense? I believe the Lord is mobilizing us for a great awakening. I really do. I think that the mischief for us is we're looking for a spiritual alternative to the battle that God has us in. Let me suggest to you, the awakening is actually in the conflict. If you want to be in the awakening, the remnant that went when Nehemiah went to rebuild the wall, when Ezra went with his 50,000 to go to Jerusalem, if you study it closely, after the decree was made by Cyrus, after God moved governmentally, when the people of God went to Jerusalem, you have to move to the next location. You have to form the wineskin. You know what the wineskin is? It's the relationships you discover that are obeying God right now to go to the next location. When you get there, whoever's there is your wineskin. Some people might be there you never thought would be there. Other people you thought would be there might not even show up. So be it. Whoever shows up there in the Jerusalem project is your wineskin. And here's the secret. As it starts to teach, there will be revelation, revival coming from the open book. The Feast of Tabernacles took place while Ezra was preaching. While Ezra was preaching, a double portion of rain came down. While Ezra was teaching and making plain the meaning of Scripture, it had prophetic relevance to all the Jews who were alive, and they got insight. And in the insight, they had a revival. I think there's going to be a revival of the Word of God. my camp, which is largely Pentecostal and evangelical. I'm saved by evangelicals. I was kind of like discipled by Pentecostals. But Pentecostals all love the phenomenon, but they're not always strong on the Word. And the evangelicals are strong on the Word, but then they're not relying enough on the supernatural power of God. We're going to need both coming together in a precious way. I think it's in the Ezra stage. I think it's in the next stage we're entering into right now. It's where we're having enough people move over, and I think the pressure of the cultural conflict is going to cause, just remember this message, it's not going to go away, because your enemies are ideologically funded and determined to disciple America. And in that plan, they plan on annihilating your freedom of speech, because you're a political adversary and they've got to take you out.